As America goes to the polls for midterm elections, the mood of its people will be measured against rising interest rates and inflation. In Australia and America, it's clear voters are not happy as they swing from political party to party seeking leadership. Now, one company that's taken the pulse of communities in 160 countries for more than 100 years is Gallup, famous for its Gallup polls. By coincidence, its chief executive, John Clifton, is in Australia right now, launching a new book called Blind Spot, The Global Rise of Unhappiness and How Leaders Missed It. And I spoke with him earlier.
We've been now taking the pulse of people all over the world for the past 15 years, asking about how much stress, sadness, anger, physical pain, and worry they experience every single day. And what we're most concerned about is the fact that this has been on a steady rise for a decade straight. And this isn't just a concern in America, it's a concern in almost every single country in the world. And that's why we've released a book on it at this time.
Okay, so why is happiness, the level of happiness in a community, why is that important in terms of its long-term prosperity, or indeed the way in which, governments and leaders might interact with the communities?
Because the reason we make decisions is not based on rational thought, it's based on how we feel. And the challenge with that is so many indicators that we watch as leaders are based on rational thought, things on how much people spend or the size of economies. But there are very little indicators on how people feel, and we believe that's a massive problem. And since we've been tracking it, that's why we see this massive increase in negative emotions.
So is this the reason why a country such as Australia could be one of the most prosperous in the world, and yet there can be levels of unhappiness in communities, even those that might be some of the wealthiest? This is the thing, that money doesn't make you happy.
Without question. In fact, in the United States, when we first did this, we found that the United States was tied for 20th in the entire world for anger, stress, sadness, physical pain, and worry. And interestingly enough, over the past 15 years, America dropped to 50th. And the reason America dropped is not because Americans became more happy. The reason that America dropped in these unhappiness rankings is because the rest of the world caught up to them. So it is a concern, especially in wealthy countries.
But broadly, you say that Australia is relatively healthy compared with most other parts of the world. Yes, there are stresses. Yes, there are areas that need to be improved. But broadly, Australia is in reasonably good shape compared with other places.
That's a fact. Australia is doing better than a lot of other wealthier countries when it comes to these negative emotions. In fact, just in the past year, Australia, in 2021, when we did our last global pulse, Australia ranked around 75th to 80th out of the 122 countries where we were able to capture data. So it's a very positive score for Australia.
So go to the midterm elections now, because clearly, having moved Donald Trump and the Republicans out of the White House and then moving Joe Biden in, but then having the potential of having really the House of Reps then turned over again in this election, it again shows that the level of dissatisfaction, or happiness, if you like, with politicians is a very real and very tangible thing.
Without question. There was that famous line in the 1980s when Ronald Reagan was running against Jimmy Carter, and he was closing his arguments in the debate. And he said, ask yourself, is your life better than it was 4 years ago? And a lot of people think that was a pivotal moment in the election and caused people to end up voting for Ronald Reagan. That remains true today. And the thing that voters are often thinking about is their life getting better or not? And this is one of the reasons that when we ask Americans, for example, what are the single biggest issues facing you? Many of them are concerned about basic issues like inflation and whether or not they can afford the basic things that they need every day in their lives. So this is why it's so critical for leaders to be paying attention to these things, because this is ultimately how voters make decisions in elections.
So then come to the other small thing. Does genuine leadership make people happy? What I'm trying to get to here is, if you get a political leader, if you get a corporate leader, you somebody who actually brings the team together, gives them a single common purpose, is that something that can give people satisfaction? Maybe that's the thing that's missing right now.
Well, if you take workplaces, for example, I don't necessarily know that the North Star is happiness, because happiness, when we think of that exact term, is more of a fleeting or ephemeral feeling. But what I think leaders should strive to do is create a thriving workplace, which means that people have the basic things in order to do their jobs effectively. It means that they have the opportunity to do what they do best, or enjoy the people that they work with, or have an organization that actually cares about their well-being. When those fundamental needs are met, only then can an actual workplace be a place where people can thrive. But it's not necessarily happiness, which is something that you experience more in a social context and is more of a fleeting emotion.
John Clifton, Chief Executive of the Gallup Company, of course, data analytics company, been around for many, many years, but also the author of a new book called Blind Spot, The Global Rise of Unhappiness and How Leaders Missed It. Many thanks for your time on the program today.
Thank you for having me.